My husband blamed me for taking our toddler to the ER, the fight that almost destroyed our family. I was terrified for our son's health, but instead of support, I faced anger and blame. What should have brought us together tore us apart. The hotel room was quiet except for the faint humming of the air conditioner and the occasional shuffle of sheets as I watched my son sleep. We were in Orlando, just a few days into what was supposed to be a relaxing family vacation. The lights were dimmed, my phone charger coiled on the nightstand, and the suitcase half unpacked beside the bed. But I couldn't sleep. Something didn't feel right. I had noticed it the night before. My son, barely 2 years old, had been breathing fast in his sleep. At first I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe it was the unfamiliar room or the excitement of travel. But deep down, my mother's instincts kicked in, and the unease refused to leave. The next morning, he was different. He didn't want to play with his toys. He wouldn't eat his favorite cereal. He barely made a sound. He just lay there curling up beside me like a child twice his age. His eyes were heavy, his body limp. Every time I picked him up, he just rested his head on my shoulder as if he didn't have the energy to hold it up himself. This wasn't him. All day I waited. I watched. I kept hoping he would snap out of it. I whispered to myself that maybe it was just exhaustion. Maybe the long car ride from Miami, the change in routine, the heat. But by evening, it was clear this wasn't tiredness. It was something more. That night, after giving him a bath, I tucked him into the hotel crib and sat beside him. That's when I noticed it again, the rapid breathing. His small chest rising and falling too fast, his nostrils flaring slightly. His skin felt warm, his cheeks flushed. Panic started to set in. I touched his forehead, burning. I called my husband, who was sitting on the other bed, scrolling through his phone. "He's breathing too fast again," I said softly. He looked over, barely lifting his eyes from the screen. "He's fine. You worry too much. I'm serious. He's lethargic. He's not acting normal. He's burning up," I said, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. He sighed, shaking his head. "It's just a cold. Kids get sick. You always overreact." I stared at him, stunned. He's not himself. I've never seen him like this. "I'm taking him to the ER." My husband's expression changed instantly. He sat up, his face contorting with irritation. "Seriously, the ER? You're going to drag him out of bed because you're anxious. Do you know how many germs are in a hospital? He'll catch something worse." I felt my stomach knot. He's already sick. I'm not going to sit here and do nothing if he needs help. You're projecting your anxiety onto him. "This is all you," he snapped. "You're going to make him grow up thinking he's fragile because of your own issues." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just disagreement, this was blame. And it hurt more than I could admit. "I'm his mother," I said, my voice cracking. "And I know when something's wrong." Without another word, I grabbed our son's small bag, slipped on my shoes, and scooped him gently from the crib. He stirred slightly but didn't resist. His arms fell around my neck like a rag doll. My heart dropped. This wasn't normal. As I walked out of the hotel room, I heard my husband mutter under his breath, "Unbelievable." In the car ride to the ER, I kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other reaching back to touch his leg, just to reassure myself he was still there. Tears welled up in my eyes. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. I was scared. I was alone. And the person who was supposed to support me had just dismissed me like I was hysterical. The ER waiting room was dimly lit and cold. I held him close, feeling the heat of his fever against my chest. When the nurse took us in, I explained everything, the breathing, the lethargy, the fever. She nodded, her face serious, and quickly took his vitals. "I'm glad you brought him in," she said. "He's definitely running a fever and his breathing is elevated. Let's get him checked right away." Those words, "I'm glad you brought him in," were the first validation I'd had all day. I felt myself exhale just a little. I texted my husband. "We're getting checked now. His fever is real. They said it was good I brought him." No reply. I sat in the small room watching the nurse place a pulse oximeter on his tiny finger. His oxygen levels were low. The nurse didn't say much, but the speed at which she moved said everything. After what felt like hours, the doctor came in. "He has rhinovirus and a strain of the flu," he said. "The fever is high, but we've given him medication." "You did the right thing bringing him in." I nodded silently. My heart was breaking and swelling all at once. I felt relief, anger, fear, and guilt all tangled together. Why did I have to fight so hard to do something so simple to protect my child? As I sat there in the sterile hospital room holding my sleeping toddler close, I realized something I didn't want to admit. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about trust, respect, and partnership, and something in my marriage had cracked in a way I didn't know how to fix. The fluorescent lights of the hospital hallway cast a cold clinical glow that did nothing to warm the heavy weight settling in my chest. I sat on the stiff plastic chair, our toddler finally resting in my arms after the medication kicked in. His breathing was still shallow but less labored. He looked so small, so fragile against the sterile sheets and the cold room. Yet despite the relief washing over me, a darker storm brewed inside, not just from fear for my son, but from the silent war brewing between my husband and me. When my husband finally arrived at the hospital, it wasn't with concern or empathy. He stormed through the automatic doors with a scowl, his jaw tight and eyes avoiding mine. I could feel his anger radiating off him like a physical force pushing me away. He barely glanced at our son. Instead, he turned to me, voice low but sharp. "You really dragged us here over nothing." "He's fine. You're overreacting like usual." I swallowed the lump in my throat and held our son tighter. "He's not fine. He was breathing fast. He's burning up. The doctor said he has a virus and the flu. He needs care." "No, he doesn't," he said coldly. "You're making this a bigger deal than it is. You're just anxious, and now you're infecting him with your panic." The words hit like a punch. I glanced down at my son, tiny, vulnerable, barely able to keep his eyes open, and back at my husband. How could he be so blind, so unwilling to see? My voice trembled. "He's sick, and I'm trying to protect him." "Why won't you help?" He crossed his arms and shifted his weight. "Because you're overreacting. You think every little thing is an emergency. You're exhausting." For a moment, the only sounds were the quiet beeping of the heart monitor and my son's uneven breathing. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake him until he understood. But I held it together. I had to. For our son. I tried to calm myself, reminding myself that he was probably scared too. Scared of a hospital, scared of illness, scared of losing control. But the way he treated me, cold dismissive like I was the enemy, was something I wasn't prepared for. As the nurse came back in with more medication, my husband still didn't move to help. He leaned against the wall, scrolling on his phone, completely detached. I couldn't even get him to hold our son's hand or offer a word of comfort. My heart ached, not just for my child, but for the fractured partnership I thought we had. The man I married, the father of my child, was now a stranger, a silent opponent. Later that evening, in the quiet hospital room, I tried again. "Look, I know you don't like hospitals. I get that. But this isn't about fear or anxiety. This is about him. Our son needs us." He looked at me, eyes cold. "You always say that, but you're the one making him worse with all this stress. Kids pick up on it." I shook my head in disbelief. "No, he's sick. The doctors confirmed it. Can you just, please, try to be here for him?" "For me," he scoffed. "I'm here, but you don't need to drag me into your panic." That night, I watched him sleep, or at least pretend to, in the chair by the bedside. I wanted to believe he cared, but his silence was deafening. As dawn crept in, I sat alone with my son, still feverish but stable. I held him close, wondering how we had come to this. How had something so simple, concern for our child, turned into a battlefield? In that quiet hospital room, I felt isolated. Not just by my husband's coldness, but by the crushing loneliness of being the only one who seemed to understand the gravity of our son's illness. And beneath it all was a raw, painful truth: I couldn't protect my son alone. Not when the person I trusted most refused to stand with me. The next morning came wrapped in a dull haze, the pale sunlight filtering through the hospital blinds, failing to brighten my spirits. Our son was sleeping again, his fever breaking slowly but surely. Yet I felt far from any relief. What lingered heavier on my heart was the silence between me and my husband, a silence that had grown into an invisible chasm over the past hours. He barely spoke, barely looked at me. At one point, I caught him watching me with a tight, unreadable expression. But when I tried to meet his gaze, he turned away like I was an unwelcome shadow. I kept replaying the events from last night in my mind. The harsh words, the cold dismissiveness. I had always thought we were a team, raising this child together, protecting him from harm. But tonight, that illusion cracked wide open. I had never felt so alone. As I cradled our son in my arms, I wondered if he even noticed the tension, the hostility, the division. Was he scared not just by the illness, but by the invisible war raging between his parents? Did he feel my heartbeat pounding with worry? Did he hear the tightness in my breath as I tried to steady myself for the next wave of uncertainty? The truth was, I was scared too. Scared for my son's health, scared for the future of our family, scared of the man sitting across the room who looked like someone I barely knew anymore. Later, as the nurse returned to check on our son, I felt a sudden surge of anger mixed with sorrow. "Can you please help me?" I asked softly, voice barely above a whisper. "I need him to hold the baby while I get some water. Please." My husband shook his head without looking up. "I'm tired. I've had enough." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about tonight or even this virus. This was about something deeper, something broken between us that neither of us knew how to fix. I managed to stand up, rocking our son gently in my arms, and went to the water fountain myself. When I returned, I found my husband staring out the window, jaw clenched. "Do you even care?" I asked, the words trembling on my lips. He finally turned to face me, eyes hard. "Of course I care. But you're suffocating all of us with your panic. Maybe if you stopped being so anxious all the time, things would be better." The accusation stung like a slap. "I'm trying to save our son." "No, you're trying to control everything. This whole trip, this whole life, it's about your fears, not about what's really happening." Tears welled up, blurring my vision. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg him to understand. But instead I whispered, "I don't know how to make you see." He shook his head and walked away, leaving me standing there with my son's tiny body warm against my chest, feeling more isolated than ever. That night, as I sat alone by the hospital bed, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos, pictures of us smiling on our wedding day, playing with our son when he was a newborn, laughing in the sunlit kitchen of our Miami apartment. Those images felt like echoes from a past life, a different family. I wondered if we could ever get back there. The following days at the hospital felt like an endless stretch of waiting and watching my toddler fight through the fever, watching the doctors run their tests, and most painfully watching my husband and I drift further apart. Every glance between us was loaded with unspoken frustration. Every word exchanged felt like walking on shards of glass. I tried to bridge the gap. I reached out in small ways, asking him to hold our son, while I grabbed a coffee, suggesting we split duties to make the hospital stay easier, but he met every attempt with cold silence or sharp deflections. One afternoon, after a particularly rough night where our son's cough worsened and his breathing grew shallow again, the tension boiled over. I was trying to calm him down, whispering soothing words while rubbing his back, when my husband abruptly stepped into the room. "You're making it worse," he snapped. "He needs to stop feeding off your panic." I froze, holding our son close, my heart pounding. "Excuse me," I said, voice cracking. "You heard me," he said, eyes blazing. "You think you're doing the right thing, but all you're doing is scaring him and making this situation 10 times harder." The room seemed to shrink around me. The exhaustion, the worry, the helplessness all collided into a single moment of crushing despair. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. "I'm trying to keep him alive, and you're telling me I'm the problem," he scoffed. "Maybe if you weren't so anxious all the time, none of this would be happening." I shook my head, my tears falling freely now. "You don't get it. I've never seen him like this before. I've never had to do this alone." "Alone," he laughed bitterly. "You think I'm not here. I'm right here, and all you see is the enemy." The weight of those words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. For a moment, everything inside me shattered the dream of a united family, the hope that we would face this together. I felt utterly broken. I gathered our son in my arms and left the room, needing space to breathe, to think, to hold on to whatever strength I had left. In the hallway, I sat on a cold bench, my mind racing. How had things come to this? When did my husband turn from my partner into my adversary? Was this really about anxiety and fear? Or was something deeper? Resentment, frustration, maybe even fear on his part? I didn't know. All I knew was that I was scared. Scared for my son, scared for our marriage, scared for the future. When I returned to the room, my husband was sitting quietly by the window, looking smaller, somehow less angry. "I'm sorry," he said quietly without looking at me. I blinked, surprised. "What? I'm sorry if I made you feel like I don't care. I do. I just don't know how to handle it. This whole situation, it scares me too." For the first time in days, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in him. "I'm scared too," I admitted. "I don't want to lose him. Or us." He nodded slowly. Maybe we can try to get through this together." And in that fragile moment with our son sleeping peacefully between us, I dared to hope. Maybe the worst was behind us. Maybe we could find our way back to each other. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope, fragile, but hopeful. The tension between my husband and me hadn't vanished overnight. But for the first time in what felt like forever, we were beginning to rebuild something piece by piece around the most important person in our lives, our son. Our toddler's condition slowly improved. The fever broke, the cough softened, and his breaths became easier to take. Watching him regain strength was like seeing a tiny miracle in slow motion. Every smile, every little coo, every fluttering eyelash was a reminder of how precious and fragile life truly is. But what was even more remarkable was the shift between my husband and me. We began talking, really talking about our fears, our frustrations, and the walls we had unknowingly built between us. One quiet evening in the hospital room after our son had drifted into a peaceful sleep, my husband reached out and took my hand. "I'm sorry for how I acted," he said, voice rough with emotion. "I was scared, and instead of supporting you, I pushed you away." I squeezed his hand, tears welling in my eyes. I was scared too, but I never wanted to fight with you. I just wanted us to protect him together. He nodded. "We're in this as a team. I don't want to be on opposite sides." That night felt like a turning point. We promised each other to face whatever came next, united not just for our son, but for ourselves. When we finally returned home to Miami, the memories of the hospital still lingered, but so did the lessons. Our son's illness had tested us in ways we never imagined. It had peeled back layers of fear and frustration, but it also revealed the depth of our love and the strength we could find when we leaned on each other. In the weeks that followed, I noticed small changes. My husband became more attentive, more present. He helped with feedings and diapers, stayed up during the nights when our son was restless, and even suggested we schedule a follow-up appointment with the pediatrician, a gesture that felt like a silent apology and a promise all in one. For my part, I learned to breathe a little easier, to share my worries instead of carrying them alone, and to let him in when I felt overwhelmed. Our family wasn't perfect. We still had arguments, moments of doubt, and days when exhaustion clouded everything. But beneath it all was a new foundation built on understanding, communication, and the fierce love we shared for our little boy. Looking back now, I realized that the hardest moments revealed the truest parts of us. The anger, the silence, the tears, they were all part of a journey toward healing. And in the quiet of our home, watching our son giggle and play, I feel a deep gratitude for his resilience, for the chance to grow stronger as a family, and for the hope that no matter what comes, we will face it together. That story was intense and truly heartbreaking. It reminds us how fear and misunderstanding can strain even the strongest bonds. If this video touched you or made you think, please give it a like and subscribe to Reddit Jury for more real-life stories that dive deep into human emotions and relationships. Your support means everything.